Welcome to our webinar today on strategies for shifting power from funder-driven to community-driven. My name is Lisa Attygalle, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement with the Tamarack Institute. Let's begin today taking a moment to reflect and honor and think about the land that we're on, its history, the impacts of colonization, and to acknowledge that these truths. And as we do it, we also want to name our commitment to action through reconciliation. And this includes respecting the land and the waters, keeping our promises, partnering with humility, respect, and honor, and living forward in a way that brings harmony and balance, a world where no one lives at the expense of another. And I invite you to share your own acknowledgements or reflections in the chat as we take a moment as we begin today. I'd like to now introduce our guests today, our tribe of women who are going to share their thoughts and ideas and experiences. So all of our speakers are joining from Maine, which is the unceded homelands to the sovereign people of the Wabanaki Confederacy. So representing the Sewall Foundation is Gabriela Alcalde and Lauress Lawrence. The Sewall Foundation seeks to improve the well-being of people, animals, and the environment while fostering equity and centering community voices. Sewall has been on a learning journey and are exploring different ways they can transform themselves and how they work. And so today they'll be sharing what they're learning with us. Welcome, Gabriela and Lauress. Also joining us is Fowsia Musse. She is the Executive Director and Co-founder of Maine Community Integration. This is a non-profit ethnic community-based organization in Lewiston-Auburn, committed to integrating new Mainers into their communities while respecting and uplifting their diverse cultures, identities, and tradition. Maine Community Integration is a grantee nonprofit partner of the Sewall Foundation, and Fowsia has been an active contributor in shaping Sewall's efforts in shifting power. Welcome, Fowsia. And Lisa Sockabasin is the co-CEO of Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness, which supports community-driven, culturally centered public health and social services to all Wabanaki communities and people, while honoring Wabanaki cultural knowledge, cultivating innovation, and fostering collaboration. Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness is also a grantee nonprofit partner of Sewall and encourages Sewall through these shifts to a more relational focus. Welcome, Lisa. The central question to our discussion today is, what strategies are being used to shift power from funders to community organizations? So we're going to explore what's working and what is everybody learning along the way. We'll talk specifically about two of Sewall's place-based and population-based focus areas, Wabanaki communities and tribal governments, and also Lewiston-Auburn. So a reminder throughout the webinar today, please add any questions to the Q&A box as we go. So let's start with the Wabanaki communities and tribal governments focus area. So Gabriela, I'll invite you to share a little bit about the focus of your work and the ways that you're working to shift power, and then we'll hear from Lisa and from her perspective. Over to you, Gabriela.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for inviting me and for allowing me to present alongside these fabulous women that I have the honor of working with. I want to start a little bit by locating and placing the Sewall Foundation, which is a foundation that, as Lisa mentioned, works towards improving the well-being of people, animals, and the environment. And we really see that as interconnected. Interconnectedness is a really central part to how we do our work. I would say the primary way that I would describe the transformation that we have been going through for many, many years is about becoming increasingly more aligned with our values. So we're really grounding in our values and spending time internally, understanding what those values mean to us and how we can translate them so that they're not just words, but that we actually can communicate and transmit those values through our actions, through our processes, through our internal structure. So we've done work to our own organizational structure. We believe it's all interconnected internally and externally. So we have to pay attention to all of the layers of how we do our work if we want to be good partners. And we do believe we have to take that responsibility very seriously, because philanthropy has an outweighed influence and power, and historically has been extractive. And so I think we need to recognize that. And when we have caused harm, whether intentionally or not, that we need to take that on. We need to be aware of it and approach it with eyes open. We work within the framework of trust-based philanthropy. And again, this is for our internal and external work, which again is a values-driven approach that really helps us to ask the question of how power is operating and to flip the sort of the script and the directionality of how that has been happening in traditional philanthropy. Specifically, when we're thinking and working with Indigenous communities, we start with the recognition that Indigenous communities are sovereign nations. That we have to keep front and center. That has to drive and shape our approach, and we must recognize the historical harm of colonization and the role that philanthropy has played in the various reincarnations of colonization. So again, I'm sort of providing some context, because this is really what we've been working so much on, is like, these are our beliefs, these are our values, how do we communicate them? So when I joined the foundation, one of the first things that we talked about was really wanting to deepen our relationship, our investment in Indigenous communities. So this was in late 2019, and we had talked about doing lots of meetings and conversations and community engagement. And of course, as we all know, COVID had different plans for us. So in 2020, we thought, okay, we will put off, because we really believe these should be in-person meetings. By the end of 2020, we realized we cannot put this on hold. Relationships have to develop, they have to continue to be nurtured regardless of what's going on around us. And this is an opportunity to be adaptive. So we worked with Tamarack Institute, and we really started to think about what is it that we want to do? And one of the things that we realized is we do not believe that foundations should set outcomes for communities or organizations and tell them how to do their work, because that is not our expertise. That is not our role. So we wanted to really engage in learning with and from Indigenous communities, specifically Wabanaki communities. And we wanted to come in with a posture of listening, and really listening with our whole selves. We worked really hard to think about the methodology and the process. How can we do this in a virtual space? How can we have connection? How can we have the humanity of it, and the many emotions that are going to be there when you're talking about aspirations and dreams for communities in a virtual space? And so we did it first in one-on-one or one-on-twos conversations, and we would ask some very high-level guiding questions about what are the aspirations and dreams for community. What are the things that really occupy your energy and your time? And how can Sewall be a better partner? How can we be a good partner? So we ended up having a series of one-on-ones and small groups, and then we had 2 broader collective sessions. And Lisa Sockabasin was very generous and invited us as well to meet with her team and have a conversation about this. And that really allowed us to test out the virtual space with more than 1 or 2 people. What we discovered was that despite the virtual space, by coming into this with a lot of humility and just a really genuine desire to connect, the conversations were extremely rich. They were vulnerable, they were generous. And it allowed us to really take a much more organic approach to this. So, we had some slides that we prepared, and as we got into it, we realized that's not relationship. Putting up these slides with specific questions and timing it and telling people it needed to move on to the next thing, that was not going to work. So we really we went in a similar way, I think that Sewall is trying to do its work by saying, what are our values? What is our purpose? And within that, we have space. We have space to really explore with our partners. We don't have to come in with this linear model of here's how things are going to happen. And we're going to tell you what we want or what we need. And then we're going to take it and build our own strategic plan and go out and do it. That was not our intention. We knew that that is really just replicating colonization and the extractive nature of philanthropy. So what we said was, tell us about your priorities so that we can make sure that we align our work with your priorities. We are not going to use those priorities to exclude funding. We are not going to use this to make funding decisions. It is going to really enhance our ability to work in partnership with community. I think a critical part of it was for the listening team to locate ourselves, to recognize that we are not neutral. We are not coming into these conversations with the, I think generally there's a white normative gaze that is presumed as the norm, and communities are seen as the other. And we really wanted to make sure that that was not a dynamic that was set up. We had a great team of very diverse identities and experiences. And by sharing that with each other and with the groups that we met with, we allowed for a much more human interaction. For example, I am an immigrant from Peru. I am mestiza, which means that I have both Indigenous and European ancestry and cultural background. That informs how I see the world. That informs how I see myself, how I engage with others, how I understand the history of colonization, how I understand indigeneity, how I understand colonization and Europeans. So it was very important for us to be transparent about the biases and the experiences that we brought so that we could have this really full conversation. When we found the themes, we also said, you know what, there is no way we can create this linear document that is going to provide the depth of these conversations, because there's really, it's hard to express how rich these conversations were and how filling they were for those of us who were lucky enough to participate. And so we got creative and we talked about what it would mean to us to share these in a way that was symbolic to all of us, which is how we came up with the visual of a blanket, which meant a lot to all of us on the listening team. And we put the threads through here so that we could identify, not in a hierarchical way, but still provide some level of organization around, if you look here on the two sides, you see themes that came up in every single conversation we had. Those were universal themes that we kept here. And we felt it was important. That's sort of what bound things together. Within that, you see the bright orange. Those were themes that resonated throughout our conversations, that they came up multiple times. And they were connected to all these other themes that people were fleshing out for us through stories, through sharing. And then as you look below, you'll see these little threads of pieces that we felt were really important that we heard repeatedly again, and that people said, you know, these are things that are really important to not just our priorities, but the how of the work. And finally, we paid attention to leaving a thread without anything there, because we know that listening and relationship is ongoing. It is continuous. This is a living document. And in fact, Lisa Sockabasin and Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness is partnering with us, and we're co-hosting a gathering in September to continue this conversation. We will be sharing this blanket, again, document with everybody and continuing that conversation. If I have one more minute, I want to share something really important about the process, is that we knew that we didn't want to do traditional research either, because traditional research has also been extractive. So we didn't want to come in, listen, have these really moving human connections, and then go back and write things up and then, you know, send it out to have a report that's just going to sit on a desk. So what we did is, as we came up with these themes and even the idea of presenting it this way, we created a draft and shared with every single person that we had been in conversation with. We sent it all to everybody, and we asked for consent to use any quotes We asked for feedback. We continue to shape this report based on feedback we got. So we created a feedback loop. And again, we gave back. The first people to receive the final document were the participants of the listening sessions. That was important to us, that this is about relationship building. It's not about creating a document that's going to sit on a shelf or guide the foundation in doing our work, and then we co-opt it into something that it really wasn't intended to be. This was intended to be a conversation. So I think I would close with just saying that for us, thinking about the how we do our work, it's become obvious to us that that is so much more important than what we're doing. The funding is very important, of course. We live in a world that moves with money and with resources. But how you engage in that relationship, how you engage with the conversation about community aspirations, priorities, and the use of resources is more important than almost anything. So we provide multi-year general operating support. We don't require reports if it's a one-year grant. We have options of doing conversations or convenings, sending in a report that already exists, but we're really trying to make sure that we continue to evolve into a partner that can be trusted. And we believe that we have to earn that.
Thank you, Gabriela. And that's a beautiful segue to hear next from Lisa, who is a partner. And so I'm going to invite you to share your perspectives, Lisa. How has it been working with Sewall? What changes they have made? How has that changed your organization or interacted with that? Over to you.
Yeah, Chi Willywan, big thanks, Lisa and Gabriela, and also Fowsia and Lauress. Gabriela, in the beginning of your statement, you talked about waiting because these conversations had to be face-to-face. And that is an ideal condition. That is what made Sewall comfortable. And I have to say thank you for not waiting. That the idea that things have to be ideal and comfortable to make action needs to be removed from our mindsets. The idea that we must move with a sense of urgency needs to be embedded in our mindsets. I lead an organization that has grown really, really fast. Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness, that organization that serves Indigenous people here in what is now called Maine, but it's Wabanaki territory, the people of the Dawnland, the people who greet the first light for North America or Turtle Island. And when I think about our disparities in health, our life expectancy being in the 50s, I can't not move without a sense of urgency. And so I joined this organization 4 years ago, and there was a dozen of us doing some amazing work. We are soon to be in November, 4 years later, 200 people, 70% Indigenous, doing work within community, because that, I believe, is where change happens. And what philanthropy, I believe, needs to do less of, and I believe Sewall is doing that, is stop coming up with the great ideas and start listening to the people who know the answers. Because you don't grow an organization that fast without having a lot of passionate people behind you and with you and ahead of you, oftentimes. You just don't. And so the answers are always there. And I think what Sewall did was they got out of their comfort zone and realized that there's important information to be shared and important voices to make visible. And if this is the only way to do it is through electronics, we're going to do it. And so that's what they allowed during a pandemic, that we were moving really fast. We didn't take a day off during the pandemic. That's when we moved faster. Because what we also know is Indigenous people, and this is worldwide, have not fared well in pandemics have not been the first to be served, that's for sure, often to be forgotten about. So that's what Sewall allows for, are the important voices that have the knowledge to be raised. And then to fund that. How easy is that? And it's fun because it's always relationship-based. At the organization that we've built, what we say is that wherever you are on your journey, we have a place for you. So just think about that responsibility. No matter what, we've got you. That means when times are hard, that means when it is time to celebrate you. No matter what, we're creating an organization that shows up. And that would be my biggest message. Sewall showed up. And they continue to show up and bring together and listen to the hard times, not just the celebrations. So this is important. In order to be in relationship with people, this is the value system that we hold as Indigenous people. That whenever I am with Gabriela or Lauress or other members of the Sewall Foundation, that I am going to do my best for them. Not because they have access to resources, because of them. That person-to-person interaction is so deeply within us that when it's not there with the people that want to support us, it feels out of balance. So why is it so important to move from a dozen people to nearly 200 this fall and to work really hard to serve your people and build these relationships with funders? Because there's a lot of healing to do. We have had a history that probably is not unfamiliar to any of you here today. That history with settlers, colonizers, has impacted the wellness of Indigenous people, as well as other people who have not been served well by those systems. In one of the threads of the blanket, Gabriela, that you shared was this healing of settler and Indigenous relationships that is so deeply important. So not only do we have to center Black and Brown and Indigenous people in their healing, and I believe our giving needs to be in those directions, we also need to heal together with each other. That's why we're here. This was not a mistake, I don't believe. This was intentional. We're here together to solve some real big problems. And we need that diverse perspective. Philanthropy needs us at the table because we're all going towards the same thing, I believe, is the healing, right? The healing of each other, our relationships, our land. Our land will take care of us if we take care of her. That's what we know. So the sense of urgency, not waiting until it's ideal and comfortable. We all love cozy. But the reality is, in my communities and Fowsia's communities, it's not cozy. We're creating it, but we're not there yet. I'll pass it on to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Any responses that you want to share, Gabriela?
Just appreciation. Lisa and Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness are an amazing partner. And they've allowed us to grow through that relationship. And I think something that Lisa said is really critical to the work that funders and philanthropy overall have to do, which is to not rest on our privilege, to remain within comfort. The comfort zone is dangerous. It is dangerous to most life, not just humans, to most life. on this planet. Because it is through that comfort that we have allowed exclusion, extraction, and deep harm for hundreds of years. So I think the call to really differentiate what is comfort and what is safety. I think those of us who are used to, and I say us as foundations and philanthropy, the sectors and the communities, the populations who have benefited from privilege and holding disproportionate amounts of power and resources, mistake comfort for safety. And when we're questioned, when our approaches, our structures are questioned, we feel attacked. And we have to differentiate between comfort and safety. And we always have to put our emphasis and our attention on the safety of the whole.
Thank you. Let's turn our conversation to Lewiston and Auburn now. So this is another focus area of Sewall's work. And so, Lauress, I'm going to invite you to share about the work happening here, share a little bit about the ways that you're working to shift power. And then similarly, we'll have Fowsia share her perspective of what's that like as a nonprofit partner.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's a delight to be here. We work very closely together, we being the four of us in the Zoom squares. And Lisa, thank you so much for pointing out that we don't have to wait to do it in person, as wonderful as it is to be in person. One of the lessons to be learned from the time of COVID is that distance doesn't keep us from connecting to each other, and there's been a lot of connection during the pandemic, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. I wanted to start, well, first of all, by thanking all of you for sharing what you did, both of you for sharing what you just did, and echoing a lot of it. I think a lot of similar themes are coming together in the work in Lewiston and Auburn in a very different context and in different ways, but a lot of points of connection. And where my comments are starting is two lessons that I learned early on in my time with the Sewall Foundation and in opportunities to listen to the community. One was a comment that I hear funders say a lot, which is, well, the community is the experts, they know what they need. And what's fascinating to me about hearing that comment is that, however, funders don't often act like they believe that, really. Because the funder then comes up with, the strategic plan and the strategic goals, and this is what, our mission and what we're going to do, which oftentimes is not informed by what the community's priorities and solutions are. And so I hold that up, as well as a lesson from community that I've heard many, many times, which is nothing about us without us. And so some of the journey that Lisa has shared that Gabriela shared about a little while ago has really been shaped by those two lessons that I've been really grateful to have along the way. So in 2018, when we really started looking at how to give shape to our work, we were working very broadly throughout Maine. And I used to say our guidelines were so broad you could drive a Mack truck through them, because everything, basically, we just wanted to support everything, and we couldn't do that. And so what we did was, I think the first way of listening community was just to look at the grants that we had been making and the things that we had been learning from the different communities throughout Maine, and identifying where were folks coming together, where were there places that the community in effect was telling us to focus. And we've selected from that process 7 focus areas. Some of them are place-based, like Lewiston and Auburn. Our work in relationship with the Wabanaki communities and tribal governments is a population-based focus area. We have a couple other place-based and a couple of issue-based focus areas as well. So it's a mix, and it all reflects really what we're hearing from the communities in terms of their priorities and they're working together, and where our support can help to advance their priorities. Listening, Gabriela shared about the listening process with Wabanaki communities. We went through a different kind of process, but for the same purpose, which was to really just put a pause. We didn't stop making grants, but we sort of put the grants on autopilot because we really wanted to build relationships and wanted the relationships to shape the work. And so we started in 2019 on a very small scale, one-on-one, literally with the organizations that we had supported in Lewiston and Auburn. And Fowsia, I was delighted, was one of the first that I was able to have that conversation with. And the conversation started with something like, you tell me, Fowsia, something like, help me see Lewiston through your eyes, and ended with, who else should I be having this conversation with? And those exchanges were just so very rich and just an amazing sharing. And at the end of that year, full year of those conversations, probably close to 60 of them. And at the end of that year, we brought everybody together to test, this is what we heard. Are we getting it right? What are we missing? What do we need to tweak? And that led to where we eventually are now. And I don't know if we want to share the slide, the first slide. We're very fortunate to engage with Tamarack Institute in March of 2020. And Lisa, together with developmental evaluator Susan Foster, that has worked with the foundation for many years. And I have sort of been the Sewall side of the planning team for what's becoming an amazing process of collaboration building and capacity building to shift leadership and decision making from the funder to the community. So what you see in this slide is after those one-on-ones, we did a co-design process, and Fowsia was part of that process. And we had about a dozen representatives from Lewiston and Auburn who helped to give initial shape, to name priorities, to name equity, centering youth and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And the first of the several recommendations that co-design group made was, before you start doing anything, get to know who we are. And so a whole year in 2020, close to a whole year of systems mapping, bringing people together that were working on housing, working on health, working on food systems, working on the municipal, looking at the municipal systems and structures, and really trying to, and workforce issues, and really just convening folks and asking them to name what the connections between them, so that it wasn't just us building relationships with the community, but the community's relationships also were starting to grow. They were already there, but they expanded and they deepened and they strengthened. And that started in 2020. And those conversations are still continuing. At the end of the systems mapping, we put together a work plan for a 3-year pilot that shifts the power to the community, and supports the community in working system by system instead of each individual organization doing its thing in isolation from the others, to really support people to work together towards shared goals. So the two key strategies are supporting collaboration and building the capacity to really share leadership among the many, many organizations in Lewiston and Auburn. And the next slide. So what we have here, if you can see it, is a kind of a roadmap, a conceptual roadmap with this pilot, this 3-year pilot of shifting towards a systems approach. We've had, it has sort of 2 components on this roadmap, main components. One is our grant making, which is in process of transitioning from a funder-driven, here are the guidelines, here are the hoops that you have to hop through to get the grants, to really shifting to a deliberative, collaborative process by organizations to say, okay, these are our priorities. How can we allocate these resources available from Sewall Foundation in order to best meet those priorities together? So that what you see with the green and the orange is the interplay between grant support and those quarterly collaboration building sessions, and with an eye towards, over the next 3 years, really helping the community to form an infrastructure that will really put them in the driver's seat of the work that happens in their community. This fortunately is happening at the same time that there have been 2 major funding opportunities that Lewiston and Auburn has been awarded. One is a HUD grant, a $30 million HUD grant for the Tree Streets neighborhood in Lewiston. And the other is a $375,000 Working Communities Challenge grant for economic development. And so this process is really helping to support all that sort of collaborative work and to increase collaboration in Lewiston and Auburn. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to just bring people together. So one of the strategies, really key strategies that we're using, is just bringing people together. And the virtual space, as Lisa mentioned, has been absolutely invaluable. That Lisa Attygalle can join us from Canada, and our developmental evaluator is in Massachusetts. Most of the folks in these convenings are in or near Lewiston and Auburn. And we have had, I don't know, a participation of probably 80 different organizations so far in the process of the community deciding what the work should be, and the funder learning how to partner to support them as best we can. So I am very grateful. I was, as both Lisa and Gabriela were talking about humility. I'm humble, but I'm also just so excited. I just totally love the work that they're doing, and my humility is also really, I think, joined with deep gratitude to be able to partner with you. I'm just really pleased with that, with the community. So.
Thank you, Lauress, for sharing about the work in Lewiston-Auburn. Fowsia, let's hear your perspective now as somebody who's helped shape this shift in process. How is it affecting your organization from your perspective? What's been working well or what's been challenging? And what advice have you been sharing with Sewall as they continue this work?
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, ladies. I think what is working for us in terms of this process is that before this process, we were accessing grantee, funders that have the traditional horizontal, vertical, power dynamics, and we have a hard time as we are coming from compounded trauma community with many historical trauma, war zone, and also have a lot of linguistic isolation. So it was kind of hard to access. A lot of the funders pre-process of this were strategy driven, and that have also created with community, with under-resourced community, to compete against funding, which created a lot of competition, unhealthy mission drifting and mission creeping. So it was not conducive to our health because it was creating a lot of fragmentation and broken community work altogether. With this process, leveraging, I think Sewall sort of like trailblaze for leveraging fund grantees as an investment pipelines, and also made it possible for bridge funding and capacity funding to be available, so we can work on our foundational work without running around and competing against each other. I think they did a lot of building for trust-based approach, centralizing grantees' voices, which then we were able to co-create a sort of collective approach, outcome determination, and also co-creation of of share values without drifting our mission. So I think during COVID is when we did a lot of the hard work. In the process, we learned collective work, which kind of created with its own working together, collective healing. I am from a community that come from a strong, strength-based approach. I'm coming from collective community where we know how to fetch water, how to work together, how to survive a war. So when COVID hit and Sue come to our rescue and said, how can we, centralize your voices and helping your community? In return, within our community, it created a process of healing also, and learning together and helping one another. And even further, helping the surrogate community in our community. We became also the helpers of other people who were lacking behind, So I am very appreciative of this process. It's still in a progress process, so it's not an end yet. But I like I'm very appreciative that it's still working on centralizing the grantees' voices and the community that they serve, and that I am looking forward to seeing more funding for collective approach. When you are coming from communities that are historically underfunded, have faced oppression and systemic barriers, and on the top of that, you are coming from another country where you face all that, and you come in these systems where there's still hierarchies, and you are at the bottom of the food chain, it does not contribute to collective health and healing of overall the community. So I'm looking forward other fundies to duplicate this work and take the approach of reducing the vertical traditional funding and go for more horizontal funding where communities have ownership. When people do not have ownership, for example, new Mainers, we hear a lot, people who are new to the country have a sense of transience and they don't stay still one place. You can't stay still if you don't own anything. So in order to create a sense of belongingness, it has to be driven by the people. Since US is driven by a constitution that says we the people, I think funding should also be similar, and it should be driven by the community that they serve, and it should not be driven by the funder themselves, because when funders have their own strategies, is often very biased, has a lot of implicit biases, and the outcome for the same community they're trying to help, and instead of helping them out, it actually creates more stagnation because you are conforming to what they already written for you, as opposed to what your community needs are. Did I finish my 5 minutes?
Thank you, Fowsia. I always get your voice in my head when we think about reducing competition and not having mission drift and letting the organizations lead with what they do best and censoring their voices. And thank you for for amplifying those messages to us all. Lauress, any responses from you?
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much, Fowsia, for sharing what you did. And a couple of things. One, just in response to what you said, Fowsia is a fabulous model for something that's happening in Lewiston and Auburn through this process, which is, she mentioned collective funding. We're really trying to get groups to work together towards funding, and there's a huge range of capacities of organizations, some really mainstream, very well established, long established organizations, and then some very vibrant but very small nascent community based organizations. And Fowsia's started as a small organization, but she's really worked so well together with other community leaders, raising up other community leaders. And what she's modeling for the really big guys is she's passing on leadership opportunities to organizations that are younger or smaller than hers, with intentional idea of building their capacity to be leaders in the community as well. And as she's doing that, I hope it's modeling to the really big organizations that have access to more free resources to step back from the grant opportunities. Don't step back from the collaborative process, but don't go after Sewall grants that could really be more focused on smaller communities, organizations to build their capacity. So I really just am so grateful, Fowsia, that you're doing that, because it really is a learning process for everybody in there. And the other thing that I just forgot to mention earlier, but I will say, is that one of the challenges that came up pretty early in the co-design process, so another recommendation that we're acting on, is right in the middle of COVID, when the community organizations were just stretched to the max trying to meet the needs. They were really clear, honest, and blunt with funders that we don't have time to jump through hoops. So all you funders that keep telling us to collaborate need to start doing what you preach, what you're asking us to do. And it's been wonderful in Lewiston and Auburn to have, we've got now a group of about a dozen funders that are meeting quarterly as well, and trying to figure out how do we collaborate better so that we can support and partner with the community better. So really, really important wisdom from the community that's driving this process.
Love it. Thank you. We have lots of questions that have come in. So let's turn to those. I love thinking about like what's been challenging, right? What's been the things that have been hard? And that's why we want to have this conversation today as well. So I'll start with has the Sewall Foundation thought of creating a collaboration toolkit that can be shared with other foundations and governments?
We have not. We have had actually a few people have reached out and said, we use this in this way. Have you thought about that? So it may be something that we think about. I'm just always cautious that you can't replicate things exactly. You can give, that's why I said, you've set the pillars of your values in a shared direction. But once you start trying to do the exact same thing you did, it's not going to happen. It depends on the context and depends on the people there, the energy that's brought there. So I think we can provide some general guidance. Maybe a toolkit is a little bit more specific than what we would want to share. Mm-hmm. But thank you for that suggestion.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of writing up the case study too of the Lewiston-Auburn process, is around, we can do storytelling around what's happened here and why, and then invite people to learn from that and ask questions around what would work where you are, and how do you facilitate listening processes in your spaces. Next question. Has the foundation considered bringing representation to the negotiations or process, i.e. hiring an Aboriginal person to work with Aboriginals, etc.?
Yes, and this, interestingly, Lisa Sockabasin actually was on the board of the Sewall Foundation and then was on the staff of the Sewall Foundation. And Lisa absolutely influenced and helped us learn. This was before I joined, so I've gotten to know Lisa as a partner rather than a staff member or a board member of the Sewall Foundation. What we responded to, and this is absolutely something we've talked about down the road, but what we responded to was that we heard from a number of our partners, you need to send us somebody who can be making decisions, and you should not ask for our tribal chief, for example, to meet with you if you're not going to be sending your ED. So as the CEO of the foundation, I am the programmatic lead. As a show of we hear you and we absolutely understand, and that when we're dealing in this international, this cross-national relationships, it is absolutely imperative that whoever we're tasked with speaking with our Indigenous partners has the ability to make those decisions. Now, that's why we're also making changes internally at Sewall, so that I am not the only person making those decisions, because part of the heart of everything we've talked about today is recognizing that power is dynamic. And when we see power as stable and static, we see abuse of power. So part of what we're doing is really trying to learn, how do we organize ourselves in a way that power is dynamic and we don't bottleneck ourselves or our community partners by saying that only a few people can make decisions about really important community-based things.
Lisa, anything you want to add?
Well, just that, Gabriela, you are Indigenous, so there's that. And that matters. So thank you for the question. It matters. And yeah, during my time, really being able to both educate and learn myself, the grant making world and the philanthropic world was really important and enlightening. And I would say, you know, the past 4 years since I've been gone is where a lot of this exciting work happened. So, you know, it was nice to be able to influence. However, it was also nice to move out of the philanthropic space and work within my community, having gained that knowledge and level of relationship. It has certainly been a part of the success story of Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness, is that experience and relationship, deep relationship with other folks, you know, Sewall and other folks that have really benefited from that understanding, and Indigenous organizations across the state of Maine, Wabanaki territory, have really benefited from that. So absolutely, that diversity within is important, and it's also hard. So that's important to realize, that diversity in a space that typically doesn't have it, and the systems that are in place have been systems of oppression for oftentimes people of color. It's a tough space to be in. And so making sure those supports are in place and the education is in place for everyone is just a real important learning that we all learned at Sewall.
I wrote down from what you said earlier, Lisa, philanthropy needs diverse perspectives, you know, and that being one of the things that guide it. What is the current diversity of perspectives that are informing the work? Related to power, there's two questions that we can respond to. So is there a process to deal with conflicts? So mediation, structure, processes, and also how did Sewall bring their board along the process, right? There's different levels of power, different always changing relational dynamics there. So I will invite you to respond to how to deal with conflicts and power differentials.
That's the heart of this work. Lauress, I just saw you come off, so I'm going to let you know.
I was just going to say, we were just having this conversation actually this morning. So first of all, it's a learning process for all of us. We are, for our own growth, we are planning as a staff team to have a training in power analysis and how to keep community voice front and center in that. I think for us, we are constantly walking the balance. We don't want to determine, we're not going to play referee between this one and that one, but rather I think the spirit that we spoke of earlier, supporting healing, is I think critical, and so I think in all of our processes, that's always our goal when there's conflict, is to find a way towards healing when at all possible. And the question about bringing the board along, I just wanted to correct your verb tense. How are you bringing the board along? Because for all of us, it's a learning curve, and so the staff has one process that we're sort of going through, transitioning, and the board is also transitioning in their understanding of power and power dynamics.
I would just add one piece, which I think I repeat myself constantly, but this is really so critical: clarity of values, and then translating those values. So that's something that the staff has done, and we do every year, multiple times, as an actual exercise. Here are our values. What do they mean? How do they show up? What are actions that would reflect them? And we invited our board to provide for us guidance. What does equity mean? What do our values mean? So last year, at the end of 2021, excuse me, the board worked with the staff to finalize a set of equity principles that really represent what we believe in. And for the next many months, staff is working with the board to help translate what those equity principles mean in action. So again, I think that if you ground yourself in values that you claim to believe in, and you actually articulate what they look like in everyday life and interactions, then you have to hold yourself accountable. And transparency, that's a big practice for us. We post everything, we share everything. Here's the criteria we use. Here's the limits for things. Here's what we will take on. This is what we won't take on. Because respect means we don't waste people's time, and we don't say we keep this. That's power, to hold things and not share them. So for us, it really is a process of constantly clarifying our values.
Thank you. That's a really rich theme that's run through this. How do you know you're ready? Is another question related. We are at our end of our time together, and we've had a bunch of questions just pour through. So I'll be sharing those with our speakers in case they have the ability to respond. And in the follow-up email, we can respond to a few more of those. So thank you for sharing your stories today, your experiences, and thank you for everybody for joining. Jamie's been sharing a few upcoming opportunities in the chat. And so if you want to hear about those, Jamie, I'm going to invite you to share now. And if you have to head, thank you for joining us. Jamie.
Hi, thank you, everybody. The two opportunities I shared in the chat are for upcoming workshops. One is a 4-part virtual workshop on co-design and facilitating community-led innovation. The other one is a conference of sorts, a community change experience happening in October down in Florida. We'll be linking to both of them in the follow-up email that we'll be sending to everybody who registered for today's event.
Beautiful. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and thanks again.